Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to our Lunch and Learn session with Catch. My name is Garrett Culp, and I serve our organization as Director of Development. And here at Catch, education is at the forefront of everything we do. We thank you for being here today to learn and to share that learning with your friends, family, and neighbors. There are a lot of misconceptions about people experiencing homelessness, and an educated community of messengers are essential to our efforts to end homelessness here in the Treasure Valley. Today, our topic is, who are they? People experiencing homelessness in the Treasure Valley. And our speakers are Sara Busick, Program Director of Our Path Home Connect, one of our 3 Catch programs, and Jeannette Curtis, Program Director of Our Path Home Outreach, another Catch program. This is a panel discussion, and I will ask the speakers a list of questions and then take questions from the audience. Please place your questions in the chat as you have them. Speaking of the chat, we hope this will be more of a conversation than a lecture. Please utilize the chat to introduce yourself, where you're watching from, and share your thoughts and questions as they occur. Lastly, share this conversation with a friend and engage in our upcoming sessions. With that, thank you all once again for being here and for being informed messengers. I will now welcome our speakers and we will begin our session. All right. Hey, how's it going, Jet and Sara?
Hi, thanks for having us today.
Absolutely. All right. Well, my first question is for you, Sara. If you could please explain how many people are currently experiencing homelessness in the Treasure Valley, and how do you measure that number and collect that data?
So to answer that question, Garrett, I'll answer your second question first on how we collect that data. So we do work with folks here in Ada County, specifically, anyone who's living on the streets, in a shelter, in a place unfit for human habitation. So this could be a car, a broken down trailer, RV, something like that, camping, or folks fleeing domestic violence. So all of those folks, we want them to come into our office because that's kind of how we collect that data through a process called a housing assessment. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, I believe. But anyone who's basically experiencing homelessness here in Ada County, we want them to come in for a housing assessment. And this is kind of how we start to collect that data and create a picture of what we see as homelessness here specifically in Ada County. So what my numbers show currently are that we have about 300 families. So a family is going to be a household with children under the age of 18. And then about 750 households without children. So these are going to be individuals or maybe adult couples, things like that. So what I said, I had 300 and 750, so that's a little over 1,000 households. When I look at the numbers for that, though, that's about 1,500 individual people, human beings. You know, a family's going to have more than one individual in that household. So looking at about 1,500 folks here in Ada County experiencing homelessness.
Thank you for sharing that, Sara. And my next question is also for you. If you could share some demographic information with us. I'm curious if you could include gender, age, drug usage, domestic violence, etc., about the people who are experiencing homelessness.
So we have there's typically, and this is pretty consistent throughout many communities who have homelessness in their communities, which is every community. By and large, it's more men than women. I don't have exact percentages of men versus women. However, that's kind of the breakdown of it. There's always typically more men than women. The average age that we're seeing across the board is about 43. So you're looking at folks who are more kind of middle-aged. And the reason for this is because about 70% of the people that we serve here in the homeless services system do report having some sort of disabling condition. So that means that they've had some condition crop up potentially that means that left them unable to work. So this is kind of why I think we see kind of that kind of middle age coming into the homeless system the way that we do. The other piece is that when we look at families, so when we pull the households without children and the households with children apart, what we see is by and large, the families are single mothers with about 2 children, typically. So, and the reason for that is, we think, is because about a third of our families or those households with children are fleeing a domestic violence situation. So they're trying to get somewhere safe for themselves and their children. Let's see, in terms of biracial, indigenous, people of color, we are disproportionate here in the homeless services system. So our general population, we have about 2.9% BIPOC. And what we see here in our homeless community is 14%. So what that does is that shows and points to inequities and inequality within maybe housing or just the larger community. And specific to sleeping in cars, I think this one's really important, especially because, we all feel the cold right now. We've got about 250 households. These folks report sleeping in their cars at least some of the time. And about 100 of those 250, so almost half of those are families with children under the age of 18. So we've got children sleeping in cars with mom and dad. If they're lucky, it can be a van, but a lot of times they're all sharing a vehicle. Another kind of staggering statistic for me is that 1 in 4 of our individuals, so those households without children, 1 in 4 of them are over the age of 62, which is just pointing to indicators that the community is, the rents in the community are outpacing what these folks who are typically on a fixed income able to sustain long term.
Thank you for that really important information, Sara.
Yeah.
I'm now going to turn it over to Jeannette. Jeannette, I'm curious, do the statistics that Sara shared, do they match what you and your team are seeing?
They really do. Overall, those are the folks that we're seeing too. We, for instance, see a lot of folks who are living in cars or trucks or RVs. That's a big part of the outreach that we do. And while we'll do outreach with anyone in the community, we do prioritize those who are experiencing what we call unsheltered homelessness, so sleeping on the streets or camping out or staying in cars or RVs. And within that population, we see a little bit more, it's a little bit more male. It's 62% male, and then a little bit older than the general population experiencing homelessness. So most of the folks we work with, the biggest demographic is between 51 and 61. But other than that, yeah, the folks that we work with really mirror what Sara describes as statistics. Certainly the overrepresentation of minorities and people of color, LGBTQ, a lot more trans folks show up in our community than you would see in the broader community too. So we're definitely seeing discrimination playing out in our homeless population.
And Jeannette, can you tell us more about what the outreach team is and what their main aims are?
Sure. So there are 6 folks on the outreach team, myself, 4 general outreach workers, and then we have a housing specialist too. And what we do is we go out into the community wherever people are experiencing homelessness to see how we can help. We do, again, prioritize people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness because we're really looking to connect with folks who have been disengaged. And while we do work with people who are staying in the shelter system, the fact that they're staying there usually means they have a better shot of engaging with services than people who are maybe out and about, disconnected, or maybe have sort of lost hope in the system. Those are the folks that we're really targeting, getting in front of. And we work with them, of course, to connect them with resources, but we're also just finding out in that moment, hey, what's your story? What kinds of things do you need right this second? And then we work really closely within the system with partners and other agencies so that we really understand what the available resources are for these folks that we're meeting with.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeannette. And I would encourage everyone who's listening to check out a story that Jeannette and Casey, another outreach worker, did on Idaho Matters. You can find it on Boise State Public Radio. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Sara. And Sara, I'm curious if you could tell us more about what Our Path Home Connect does.
Yeah, so our Path Home Connect is first and foremost goes through a process called coordinated entry. This is something that is in every community. It started in 2017. In order for our community to take advantage of federal funds that are utilized specifically for housing and homelessness, your system needs to have a coordinated entry. So that is kind of first and foremost what we do. In simple terms, it's basically a way for us to prioritize all of the folks who are experiencing homelessness in our area, to make sure that the most vulnerable people are floating to the top, to ensure that we're assisting them first. As in many communities and many social services, there is far more need than there are resources available. So we have to have some way to prioritize folks who basically, are going to die out there. We want to get them to the top of the list so that we can get them safely and stably housed. So that's kind of first and foremost. And we do that through doing a housing assessment. And then another piece that we just took on in July is we manage housing crisis hotline. So this is for anyone experiencing any type of housing crisis in the area. So let's say anywhere from, hey, I can't pay my rent this month because I got sick and just didn't get a full paycheck, all the way to I'm living in my car and I have nowhere to go, please help me. So and you'll see the number on the screen there, 336 home. We're super excited to be able to provide this service. What we can also do is, basically what this does is it keeps people from having to call all over the place to try and find what kind of resources that they're eligible for. We have all of that information here with us, and we can also send direct referrals to multiple agencies, so that just kind of reduces the burden on that person who's experiencing that crisis, that housing crisis in that moment, for calling all these various places. The third thing that we do here at Our Path Home Connect is that we do kind of keep all of the partners connected. You heard Jet talking about partnerships, and we really understand how incredibly important partnerships are, and collaboration, especially when working with our population here. Anyone who can stand up and say, hey, I'm working with this individual and I really want to help them succeed, really helps us get solutions for that person, gets them resourced correctly. So we also kind of have this partner network. It's not kind of, we have a very robust partner network. And then I run meetings every other week for those partners to all come together so that we can create solutions for clients and help problem solve some of their more difficult situations. So that kind of in a nutshell is Our Path Home Connect.
Thank you so much, Sara. And you mentioned housing assessments. Can you please share with us what that means?
Yeah, so the housing assessment is something that we do, again, to kind of create that prioritization for folks, so to ensure that we're helping the most vulnerable individual. But that's such a small piece of it. So there's a piece where we're collecting data, and that's what goes into the kind of the formula. But the other thing that we're doing is we're really sitting down and having an organic conversation with someone to figure out what their barriers are, so that we can help them locate resources to overcome those barriers. We can also help teach clients how to advocate for themselves. Our Path Home Connect does have a housing navigator, where when folks are coming into the system, if they have any sort of sustainable income, we're going to have them work with the housing navigator to try and come up with some quick, kind of what we call rapid resolution for someone, so that they're not sitting on a wait list for housing programs, and helping them locate housing, and then helping them get in with a first month's rent and deposit. Well, we use that housing assessment to determine, is this person going to be someone who wants to kind of go through that housing navigation process, or is this someone who needs much more support and might need one of those long-term housing programs?
Thank you so much, Sara. And I'm going to bring it over to Jet again. And Jet, can you tell us more about what Catch is doing with our partners to keep people warm this winter?
Sure, so important. The weather's getting really cold, and if you're spending most of your day or even your nights outside, you're going to want protection from those elements. So we do a few different things on the outreach team. One is that we just hand out goods and supplies when we meet people. So donated coats, we just asked for a big donation of warm supplies, and the community definitely delivered on those. So we hand out blankets, coats, tarps, propane if we have it, those things that people really need. to stay warm when they're outdoors. Even folks who are staying at the shelters are not allowed to stay in the shelters during the day. So we have our day shelter space Corpus Christi, and that fills up quickly. And so we do like to just make sure people have what they need to get around and be outside during the day. We also provide information, suggestions for people on where they might go to get warm. And then we really do work with our partners that Sara was talking about to look at our system and see what do we need. Do we have everything we need to help people through weather extremes? That's in the summer and the winter. So an example of that is we're partnering closely with Corpus Christi, our day shelter, and with Interfaith Sanctuary right now to provide some additional indoor space for this winter for folks. So a little bit of more warming space.
Thank you, Jed. And now I'm going to turn it over to both of you. I am curious to know what common misconceptions you think folks have about people who are experiencing homelessness.
One of them I hear a lot, and I've been hearing recently in the news, is that people experiencing homelessness are violent criminals or tend to be violent criminals. And we just don't find that to be true. For one thing, people experiencing homelessness are much more likely to be the victims of violence, especially violent crimes, than perpetrators, for sure. And if you look at the statistics about tickets, for instance, in the areas where there are more people experiencing homelessness, a lot of those are what we call crimes of homelessness. So trespassing, loitering, maybe camping or drinking in public, which, are a lot of things that you and I do behind the luxury of our, four walls at home and don't get ticketed for it. So you can really look at some of those crime statistics in terms of the type of crime being committed. Another misconception I hear a lot is that people choose to be homeless, that this is a lifestyle choice. Which couldn't be further from the truth. In my time working with people out here, I've actually never run into anyone who just said, no, thanks, I'm enjoying my life outdoors. I mean, maybe there is someone out there, but we run into hundreds and hundreds of people, and every single one of them is desperate for help, desperate for housing, checking in regularly. There are just a lot of complicated barriers, and one of them is usually not talking someone into housing.
Yeah, kind of going along with, what you just said, Jet, like that it's something, whether that it's a choice, that it's, we hear a lot like, well, they just need to learn to budget. They just need to get a job. Those are kind of some of the misconceptions that we hear. And, just to address those, 60 to 70% of the people that we serve right now are bringing in some kind of income. The problem is that, as I mentioned earlier as well, 60 to 70% of those folks also report having a disabling condition. So they're just not able to bring in the income that can maintain a rental out here in the Treasure Valley, or in Ada County, excuse me. And in addition to that, kind of this learn to budget rhetoric that I know that I've heard is just the math doesn't work out. I mean, many apartments, and I don't know if you know this or not, if you haven't lived in an apartment for a while, you may not, but you need to make 2.5 to 3 times the rent amount in order to even get through the initial screening process to get a rental. So when you look at say someone who's making $10 an hour, they are literally not making enough money. So they could budget until the end of time, and they are still not going to meet that initial screening criteria to even apply for an apartment. So they could save tons and tons of money, and it's still not going to get them past that initial criteria. So yeah, those are just a couple of those misconceptions that we hear pretty frequently.
Thank you both. And my next question is for Jet. Jet, I've heard in the community folks have some confusion about why people experiencing homelessness choose to live on the streets or in their cars rather than staying in shelter. So I was wondering if you could detangle that for us.
Sure. I would just start out by saying we have some amazing emergency shelter systems here in Boise who do wonderful work. But there are reasons why some folks can't stay in the shelters, and then there are really valid reasons why people choose not to. Some reasons why someone might not be able to is that they are sometimes full. We recognize that we do not have the number of shelter beds necessary at this time in Boise to meet the needs. Our homeless population is growing along with our city. We need more shelter beds. And we need larger space in our facilities too. They can be pretty cramped and chaotic environments at the way that they are now at times when they get full. Another reason is family makeup. So we have one shelter system that separates men. They have a men's shelter and a women and children's shelter, and that doesn't work for some intact families. They're going through trauma. Being separated from dad is not necessarily the best thing for some families. And some families don't have a mom. So a single father with children is not going to be able to stay in one shelter system. The other shelter system, Interfaith Sanctuary, is housing families in their Red Lion in a hotel right now, which is a wonderful option for folks, but it's full. And so there's a very long waiting list there. So some people would like to stay in a shelter, and there's just not space, or there's a waiting list. Some of the reasons why people choose not to, one we've touched on a little bit, which is they have a vehicle, a car or a truck, or even better, a camper. For folks that have this asset, a lot of them, that's preferable to staying in an emergency shelter. And it gives them a lot of things that they wouldn't be able to get there: privacy and security. You can keep a lot more property stuff in a vehicle than you're allowed to take into a shelter. And our shelters just really don't have parking in the area downtown where we have shelters that's safe to leave a vehicle necessarily. So we have a lot of folks who, if they do have a running vehicle, will choose to stay in that rather than the emergency shelters. And that doesn't mean that they don't access services with us. That's where they choose to live and sleep. Another reason I think that resonates with a lot of people are pets. If you have a pet and it's not a service animal, you're going to have a hard time getting that into shelter with you for the most part. And I know a lot of us, how we feel about our pets can relate to that decision, that at some point, when you've lost everything, you don't want to lose that last bit of support. Some people choose to stay out because they have a pet. A couple more reasons that come up. Again, we talked about, like, sometimes it can be a chaotic environment, and that's not always great for people's mental health, not for everybody anyway. Some of our families fleeing domestic violence, it doesn't feel safe when they are trying to hide from their abuser to come down to this area. And then there's a fear of infection or infestation. I mean, for some people, that's COVID. They are trying to maintain distance and stay safe, and it doesn't feel like the shelter is the right place to do that.
Thank you, Jed. And my next question is for both of you. The Valley has grown exponentially, and Catch has also grown to fit the need. And we as an organization do a lot of things. So I was wondering if each of you could comment on how Catch helps folks who are experiencing homelessness and how we help the greater community.
So there's what we do day to day when we meet people. We're meeting them, we're learning their stories, we're making that connection and providing that sort of dignified, humane relationship for someone. I think that's number one, what we try to do at Catch. And then we find out their stories, we find out what they need. Both of our teams link people to resources. So some of it is just helping provide people with what they need on a day-to-day basis. Another thing both of our teams do is problem solve. So we are helping identifying those barriers to housing and then seeing what we can do to resolve them. And sometimes that looks like resource referrals, and sometimes it looks like what seemingly simple things that can be a little bit more complicated in our community, like replacing IDs, social security cards, or government IDs. You need those to get anywhere, housing, employment, anything. And that can be really hard to do when you start from scratch. Very confusing system to navigate. So that's a lot of what we do, is help people replace those critical documents. Phones is another thing that may seem frivolous, but it's just not anymore. It's a critical tool for anyone in our society, especially when you're needing to do things like find and apply for housing or employment, or just stay in touch when you do not have a permanent address. Phones is something that we help a lot of people for. And then we advocate. We advocate at an individual level for our folks. If someone's trying to get into housing, we might help them write a letter of reasonable accommodation. That's kind of like that individual level advocating that we do. And then we advocate for the needs as a whole within our system, and then hopefully to our community as well, so everybody understands the reality of the situation.
And in order to advocate for folks, one of the other things that Catch is really good at is kind of that data collection piece. As I mentioned at our Path Home Connect, we collect data. Jet's team also collects a lot of data pertaining to what their folks need. And what that does is it gives us kind of a central place. We collect that data into what we call our homeless management information system. Many of the homeless providers out here in our community use that as well. And so we're putting all of that data together so that we can see how to best meet the needs of what is going on specifically in our community. And so we use that data to inform decisions across our entire continuum of care. One of the other things that Catch does really well is, we really foster those partnerships and those collaborations, because they're so incredibly important for the success of our clients. So we are working every day to secure partners that want to help folks who are experiencing homelessness or housing crisis, housing instability, as much as we do, and working with them on a daily basis, also at a system level and an individual level, to help our clients get what they need.
Thank you both. And before I introduce my next question, I want to remind everyone who's watching live right now that if you have any questions, please put them in the comment below, and we will answer those at the end of our session here today. And my next question is for both of you. If there's one thing that someone who's listening to this right now would know about homelessness in the Treasure Valley and would walk away with, what would be that one thing that you want them to know?
I think for me, the one thing is just how incredibly vulnerable the people that we serve are. I think that in an attempt to help people in the community relate to our population, we really kind of created this rhetoric. I think a lot of communities do, because the people that we serve are human, right? They're human beings who deserve dignity, respect, kindness, all of those basic things. So I think in an effort to say, hey, these are people just like you and me, what that has done, I think, has potentially created a thought where people are thinking, well, if you're just like me, then pick yourself up and do it. Pick yourself up and fix it. I did it. Why don't you do it? And so I really just want to drive home how incredibly vulnerable our clients are. I mean, I think that the one thing that unites the people that we serve, and I think I've said this before, is the incredible amounts of trauma that they've experienced. And this isn't, and I recognize and understand that we all have trauma that has shaped us as individuals. And this is like that times 100. We've got people out here who are hurting very badly, not only mentally, but physically, their pride, their egos. I mean, it takes a lot for folks to come ask for help. And they do, and they're so incredibly vulnerable. Like, a lot of people hear about Cooper Court, right? Because back when there was a tent city back there, and all of these things, well, we still have a population of individuals who do spend time on Cooper Street, and the reason they do that is because they're so vulnerable. They want to stay close to the resources because they're afraid. I mean, some of the folks out there can barely walk, and so it's so incredible. They're so incredibly vulnerable, and I know that it's uncomfortable to think about because we don't want to be in those places. But I'm talking to people who are on oxygen tanks, living in their car, and their oxygen tank is in the passenger seat. I'm not talking to people who want to be out here by choice and they're dangerous, and all of those things that we hear from people who might be just kind of uncomfortable around the homeless population. It's just very much so we've, I think, in a way, failed them by saying, hey, they're just like you and me, because they're really not, and they're incredibly vulnerable and they need help.
It's so true. I mean, I think that's one of the things that really shocked me when I got into this industry, and especially in Boise, where I've lived for since the mid '90s, and I really didn't understand the population until I started working within it. I am still shocked when I go out there and see people who are legally blind, in wheelchairs, developmentally disabled, seriously mentally ill, people dying, and I know that's not what we want to tolerate in Boise, and there is a solution. But yeah, the vulnerability is big. I think another thing I think people tend to, I do too, but like want there to be this simple solution. And there is no simple solution. It's very complex. The problem is complex. Every individual coming into homelessness is unique and their barriers are unique. The system itself is limited. So, I mean, we have limited money, funds, resources, everything. And so it really takes a lot to get somebody out of homelessness once they fall into homelessness. So all solutions are welcome and all solutions are part of the bigger effort, but there is no one thing that we can do as a system to end homelessness. It's going to take everyone, and it's going to take political will, and it's going to take community will as well.
Thank you both for sharing that. And in line with your sentiment, Jed, how it's going to take a community to change a community, I am curious, how can folks get involved? If they want to make an impact and help address this issue, what can they do, and how can they help and partner with Catch?
Gosh, I mean, you said it there, Garrett, just get involved. I mean, in any way that you can. I think that one thing that we would love to see are more folks getting involved in their neighborhood, people in support of homeless solutions for our folks, get involved at even just their neighborhood community level. The opposition, as a lot of us may realize, due to current political things going on, I mean, they can be very loud, and I think that it takes a whole community to say, no, this needs to be the solution to get things moving forward.
Exactly. I think you support with your voice, like Sara says, and your vote. So when there are policies on the table for affordable housing or for homeless services, vote for them. Vote for them and speak up. I mean, we hear all the time from individuals and in the news and in op-eds, like, we don't want Boise to become the next Portland, Salt Lake, San Francisco, San Diego, whatever. I mean, none of us do. And ending homelessness is possible. But we do need the support of our community. If every single neighborhood in Boise supports affordable housing and homeless solutions in their area, then we can end that. But if we don't, we will become like Portland or Salt Lake.
And I know it can be uncomfortable for folks because the whole subject of homelessness is uncomfortable and unpleasant. And what I would encourage folks to do is educate yourselves. I mean, those of you that are on this panel today, watching us, are doing just that. You're educating yourselves, and then pay that forward and educate your friends, your family members. Encourage them to come to things like this, to educate themselves, because that is how we make change happen, is really understanding the makeup of what is going on here, because by ignoring it, we will become the next Portland, Seattle, San Francisco. And so we really need to stand up and pay attention.
There are more tangible ways to help too. Of course, I can find a good nonprofit that's working in homeless services and give us your time, give us your support, donate your goods. That's been amazing. We've just had an amazing community turnout in that way. And then, like with Avenues for Hope, if you've got some, and we could really use financial donations too to keep going.
Thank you both so much for sharing today, for what you do day in and day out, and for everything that your teams contribute as well. I am curious, before we say goodbye, is there anything else that you two would like to add?
I think one thing that I would like to add is just, we social workers are a creative bunch. We love creativity and out of the box thinking. So if folks have creative solutions please present those and please support creative solutions that we have. Housing is getting more tricky around here, and we all need to be a little bit more creative. And so, just kind of supporting various creative solutions is going to help us do what we need to do.
And I'll just say it one more time. If anybody can do this, Boise can. We're Boise kind, and we can come up with a solution to end homelessness. I do believe that.
Thank you both so much. They are Jet Curtis, our Director of Our Path Home Outreach, and Sara Busick, Director of Our Path Home Connect. Thank you both. And once again, thank you to them for informing us and for the work that they and their teams do every day to help folks who are experiencing homelessness. And thank you for tuning in. As I mentioned up top, there are a lot of misconceptions about people experiencing homelessness, and educated messengers are essential to our efforts to end homelessness here in the Treasure Valley. Take care and check out our campaign at avenuesforhope.org or by going to catchidaho.org, or also engage with us on social media. Our handle is @catchidaho. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.